picture this, all right? You've spent, I don't know, decades, maybe centuries, building the ultimate medieval fortress.
Right.
You've got the thickest stone walls, the deepest moat, the absolute best trained guards stationed right at the gate. And you look around and you feel completely, perfectly secure.
Naturally.
But then your enemy just, shows up in a hot air balloon.
Yeah, game over.
Exactly. They just float right over your impenetrable, highly expensive walls, look down at everything you're doing, and they can just drop rocks directly onto your command center.
Yeah.
I mean, suddenly all those thick walls are completely useless.
Because you don't control the high ground.
Right. Because in modern national security, low Earth orbit is that new high ground. I mean, you can have the most advanced tanks, the stealthiest fighter jets, the largest naval fleet on Earth. But if an adversary controls the space above you, they can just turn off your communications and your navigation with like the flick of a switch. You are paralyzed before the first shot is even fired.
It's the ultimate strategic nightmare, honestly.
Oh,
And,
right.
what you're describing is the exact reason why the global domain of space is undergoing this massive, just radical transformation right now. We are really watching the end of an era.
We really are. So welcome to the War Room, everyone. If you're listening to this right now, chances are you're prepping for a major strategic analysis exam, or maybe you're heading into a high-level policy briefing, or, you're just someone who needs to understand the real geopolitical chessboard.
Yeah, this is essentially a mentorship session, right? Designed to give you that structural edge.
Exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this. For decades, India's space legacy has been this incredibly inspiring story of peaceful exploration, right? Like launching weather satellites, reaching the lunar South Pole, just expanding human knowledge.
Sure.
But right now, out of sheer necessity, there is an urgent, massive pivot toward military preparedness.
And that is really our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We are analyzing the rising weaponization of space, and we're going to break this down into actionable intelligence for you.
Right.
We need to decode the mechanical shift of why space is the new active frontier of warfare, identify the specific strategic vulnerabilities this creates for India, and then, map out the exact institutional and technological blueprints required to build a resilient defense.
Because you really can't understand India's pivot without first looking at how the whole global neighborhood has changed, right? I mean, space is no longer a passive, peaceful vacuum. Major global powers are actively weaponizing it. And we aren't talking about science fiction anymore.
No.
We're talking about anti-satellite weapons, or ASATs.
Yeah, ASAT capabilities are, they're the most visible, undeniable manifestation of this new arms race. I mean, we're seeing nations develop and test ground-launched missiles that can literally intercept and destroy satellites.
Satellites moving at, 17,000 miles per hour?
Exactly, 17,000 miles per hour in orbit. But to analyze this properly for an exam or a briefing, you have to look at the underlying mechanics. Like, why target satellites at all?
Right, what's the actual value?
Well, because satellites are the nervous system of any modern military apparatus. They handle the targeting telemetry for precision missiles. They provide, secure, encrypted communications between spread-out infantry units, and they offer real-time surveillance of enemy troop movement.
Right, so if an adversary can eliminate those satellites...
They effectively blind and deafen a modern army. It's that simple.
But... I mean, blowing things up in space with a kinetic strike, a missile that seems incredibly messy, right?
Yeah.
Like if you hit a satellite with a missile, you don't just vaporize it.
No, definitely not.
You turn it into a shotgun blast of high-speed shrapnel.
Yeah.
Wouldn't adversaries want to avoid that kind of, physical footprint?
Yeah.
What about the invisible threats?
You're hitting on a really crucial operational shift there. Kinetic strikes are loud, they're messy, which is exactly why the frontier is rapidly moving towards cyber warfare in space systems.
Okay, cyber warfare.
Right. And it's vital to understand how this actually works. It's not just, a guy in a hoodie hacking a computer screen. Adversaries target the uplink and downlink architectures. They can bypass ground station encryption to just disrupt the command and control links of a satellite.
Okay, wait, let's clarify that jargon for a second for anyone taking notes. When we say disrupting command and control, what does that actually look like in practice? Are they just like turning the satellite off?
Sometimes, yeah, but it can be far more insidious than that. Take the concept of spoofing.
Spoofing?
Yeah. Instead of shutting a navigation satellite down, a cyber unit might spoof its signal, meaning they feed it false coordinates.
Oh, wow.
Right. So suddenly, a naval destroyer thinks it's 50 miles away from its actual location, Or worse, a precision missile is guided into a completely empty field.
That is one.
Or, adversaries can hack the satellite's thruster controls. They just force it to burn all its station-keeping fuel, effectively turning a billion-dollar asset into a useless drifting brick.
And I'm guessing the strategic advantage here is just deniability.
Exactly. You don't need a massive launch pad. It's a low-cost avenue of warfare where attribution, like proving exactly who typed that malicious code, is just incredibly difficult.
Okay, so if a missile launch is too obvious and a cyber attack is too invisible to reliably deter someone, where's the middle ground? Like, how are adversaries hiding their intelligence gathering in plain sight?
Well, that brings us to the civilian disguise, specifically the concept of dual-use satellites.
Right.
Historically, the architectural line was pretty clear. Militaries launched military satellites, and civilian agencies launched civilian ones.
Kept them totally separate.
Yeah. Today, that boundary has completely evaporated. Take an Earth observation satellite equipped with synthetic aperture radar, or SAR.
Which can see through clouds and operate at night.
Right. Precisely. So during peacetime, a civilian agency uses it to monitor crop yields, track monsoons, things like that. But during a geopolitical conflict, that exact same satellite, under the guise of civilian research, becomes this unparalleled tool for military intelligence.
Just mapping enemy bunkers and supply lines while pretending to look at weather patterns.
Exactly.
And we absolutely have to factor in the ownership of these assets here because it's not just state governments anymore.
Yeah.
Private sector companies commercial entities like SpaceX or Planet Labs, they are deploying massive constellations of satellites.
Oh, absolutely.
And they are actively shaping modern conflict zones. They're providing internet connectivity and real-time imagery directly to war zones.
Which creates an unprecedented, frankly, chaotic variable in international relations. Just think about the strategic dilemma here for a second. If a private commercial tech company provides real-time tactical intelligence to a military force during an active firefight,
do they legally become a combatant?
Exactly. Do their commercial satellites become legitimate military targets? The blurring of lines between civilian corporate actors and military operators fundamentally breaks traditional rules of engagement.
Which naturally leads us to a frankly terrifying concept that you need to know for your exam. Space debris as a form of passive-aggressive warfare.
Yes.
We mentioned kinetic strikes earlier. If you destroy a satellite, you create thousands of pieces of debris flying at orbital velocities. But wait, isn't that essentially mutually assured destruction?
How do you mean?
Well, orbit is a shared highway, right? If an adversary creates a massive debris field to take out an Indian satellite, wouldn't that same shrapnel eventually loop around and just shred their own commercial or military assets? Why would anyone risk that?
It's an excellent pushback, and it really highlights the chaotic nature of the domain. You are right that it's highly risky, but strategically, it's used as area denial.
Area denial. Oh.
Because orbital mechanics dictate that this debris will just keep circling the Earth, it can deny access to specific, highly valuable orbital slots for decades. A desperate or aggressive nation could intentionally or, claim they accidentally create a debris field that just happens to drift through an adversary's critical surveillance orbit.
So it's passive-aggressive because it's untargeted after the initial event.
Right. The result is area denial on a planetary scale.
But relying on a sense of mutual preservation seems incredibly fragile. I mean, isn't there some sort of space police? Like a global treaty that explicitly says you cannot just create a minefield in low Earth orbit.
And here we hit the structural void you absolutely must highlight in any analysis. The governing international framework is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty.
1967. Relying on a treaty from 1967 to regulate AI-driven space lasers and cyber spoofing is wild. I mean, the cutting-edge technology back then was the rotary phone and the color television.
Yeah, it's pretty outdated.
Of course, they didn't anticipate private tech billionaires launching thousands of broadband satellites.
Exactly. The treaty mandates that space be used for, quote, peaceful purposes, unquote. But it was written long before the modern digital age. And more importantly, it lacks any robust binding enforcement mechanisms.
So literally no space police.
None. There are no immediate economic or military sanctions built into the framework. The domain is, practically speaking, a regulatory Wild West. It's completely toothless against this new wave of unchecked militarization.
All right, so let's summarize the battlefield for our listeners. We are operating in a lawless domain. facing invisible cyber threats, navigating private companies acting as intelligence proxies, and dealing with the constant threat of weaponized debris.
Right.
That is a brutal operational environment. So let's bring this home to the national importance angle. What does this specific environment mean for India?
Well, we have to evaluate India's strategic vulnerability through the lens of what we call the deterrence gap.
Deterrence gap. Write that keyword down.
Yes. India's primary geopolitical neighbors, particularly China, have aggressively accelerated their militarization of space. They're establishing dedicated space forces, testing advanced ASAT tech. India, on the other hand, having historically focused its space program on peaceful socioeconomic development, currently lacks a matching offensive space force.
Okay, let me try to visualize this deterrence gap. It's like playing a high-stakes game of chess, right?
Yeah.
But your opponent has figured out a way to reach across the board and put a blindfold on you before they even make their move.
Yeah.
If India doesn't have its own space-based tools to either remove that blindfold or credibly threaten to blindfold the opponent in return, they've lost the game before the ground troops even mobilize.
That is a perfect analogy. Deterrence theory relies entirely on the adversary knowing that an attack will be met with an unacceptable, guaranteed counterattack. Because India heavily relies on its space assets for basic military communication, border surveillance, missile guidance, losing those assets would outright cripple conventional operations.
And without robust, visible counterspace capabilities, India's deterrence posture in this specific domain is just dangerously thin.
Exactly.
And trying to catch up creates its own massive problem, right? To close this gap, India is essentially forced into an arms race, which puts a profound strain on resources. I mean, every billion rupees spent on a space-based weapons program is $1 billion rupees not spent on conventional border defense or naval expansion or domestic infrastructure. It's a zero-sum game that really strains the national budget.
It absolutely does. But, the vulnerability isn't exclusively military. It is deeply economic. India is currently cultivating a fast-growing, highly lucrative commercial space economy. We are talking about expanding satellite launch services, advanced data analytics, attracting foreign joint ventures.
Right, and nobody wants to invest in a multi-million-dollar commercial business park if it's being built inside an active war zone. The weaponization of space exponentially raises insurance costs for satellite launches. It deters foreign commercial collaboration. It jeopardizes entire constellations of civilian satellites. I mean, a single kinetic event in orbit could bankrupt a dozen commercial startups overnight.
Which brings us to the final vulnerability, the technological lag. While India undeniably excels in launch capabilities and civilian space applications, there is a recognized lag in cutting-edge counterspace systems.
What specific gaps are we talking about here?
Well, India needs development in space-based directed energy weapons, highly jamming-resistant communication satellites, and AI-powered space situational awareness.
Okay, let's break down that tech. When you say directed energy weapons, how does that actually solve the problem we talked about earlier with the messy kinetic strikes?
It's all about precision and minimizing collateral damage. So instead of firing a missile that impacts a satellite and blows it into 10,000 pieces of dangerous debris, a directed energy weapon like a high-powered ground-based or space-based laser targets the satellite's delicate optical sensors. Right. It heats them up until they melt or permanently blind the system. It disables the enemy's ability to see instantly without creating a single piece of space debris.
Okay, so the diagnostic phase is clear and it is stark. We have a severe deterrence gap, an arms race straining national resources, massive economic risks to the commercial sector, and a critical technological lag in counterspace tech.
Yes.
Now, for the exam response framework, how does India actually fix this? What is the operational blueprint for resilience?
The required response framework is a total institutional and technological overhaul. It starts with governance reform. The primary non-negotiable recommendation is the establishment of a dedicated, fully integrated space command.
A space command, not just like a civilian department that talks to the military, but a full-fledged military space command. Why is that distinction so important?
Because of the speed of modern conflict. Right now, space efforts and data are often siloed. A civilian agency operates the satellites, but the military needs the data. In a conflict, you cannot have a civilian scientist trying to make split-second military retaliation decisions while routing requests through 3 different ministries.
That'd just be too slow.
Way too slow. A space command, integrated directly under the national defense structure, centralizes the nervous system. It handles space-based surveillance, processes early warning systems for incoming threats, and holds direct command over offensive capabilities, streamlining the military's ability to act and react in real time.
But a military command structure needs a very clear rule book,
Yeah.
right? Or things escalate out of control instantly. That's where the second major institutional reform comes in, formulating a national space doctrine.
And this is a vital point for any strategic analysis answer. India recently released the India Space Policy 2023, which is excellent for commercial growth. But a national space doctrine supplements that by explicitly outlining security parameters. It publicly articulates India's deterrence posture to the world. Crucially, it defines the escalation thresholds.
Clarify that for me. What exactly is an escalation threshold in the context of space?
It defines the red lines. It answers the question: what specific hostile action in space will trigger a conventional military response from India on the ground?
Oh, like if they hack something, what do we do?
Right. If an adversary spoofs an Indian satellite, is that an act of war? What if they permanently blind it with a laser? A doctrine establishes these clear rules of engagement. Without a publicly stated doctrine, a nation risks either underreacting to a critical threat and looking weak, or accidentally triggering a full-scale nuclear war through massive miscalculation. It tells the adversary exactly where the lines are drawn.
Okay, so once you have the centralized command and the clear doctrine, you have to actually build the arsenal. And this ties perfectly into the national push for Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliance, which you always want to interlink in your answers.
Right.
In a domain this critical, you simply cannot depend on imported technology. I mean, a foreign supplier could easily build kill switches or backdoors into their systems.
Absolutely correct. The mandate is urgent investment in indigenous counter-space technology. And it has to be smart tech, right? Scalable, modular, and reusable. We discussed directed energy weapons and electronic warfare for jamming enemy signals. But India also needs to develop co-orbital ASAT systems.
Wait, co-orbital, does that mean we're essentially launching, like, kamikaze satellites? Satellites that just park themselves in orbit next to enemy assets and wait for the signal to crash into them?
Essentially, yes. They are highly maneuverable satellites that can inspect, disrupt, or physically intercept adversary satellites in the exact same orbit. But, to use any of these tools, lasers, jammers, or interceptors, you have to actually know what's happening up there.
Right, you can't shoot what you can't see.
Which is why enhancing space situational awareness, or SSA, is the bedrock of this entire strategy. A robust, real-time SSA network powered by artificial intelligence acts as the ultimate radar for the orbital domain. It tracks adversary satellite movements, predicts their orbital paths, monitors debris to prevent catastrophic collisions, and ensures the safety of the entire national fleet.
And pulling this off requires an immense amount of innovation. The government simply cannot do this alone in a bureaucratic vacuum.
It cannot. The final pillar of governance reform is institutionalizing civil-military-private integration. We need defense-focused verticals created within ISRO and in space. These bodies must actively bridge the gap between military needs and private sector agility. They need to collaborate with startups, tech incubators, and academia.
Right.
The cutting-edge innovation happening in the private sector, especially in crucial areas like space-based cybersecurity and quantum communications, must be seamlessly integrated into the military architecture.
Because if we are primarily worried about cyber warfare in space, quantum communications, which are theoretically unhackable, provide the ultimate shield.
Yes. And if we zoom out and connect all these operational details to the bigger picture, what we are really tracking here is a fundamental evolution in national strategy. Space advancement for India is no longer just about capability demonstration, like launching a heavy rocket just to prove we have the domestic science. It has evolved into a strict mandate for strategic autonomy.
Strategic autonomy.
Yeah.
Meaning the absolute ability to make independent national security and foreign policy decisions without being subtly coerced by a foreign power who happens to control, say, the GPS, the imagery, or the communications infrastructure you rely on.
Precisely. In the 21st century, if you are dependent on foreign space architecture, your national sovereignty is conditional. But there is a secondary, equally important role for India on the global stage. India cannot simply arm itself, build a fortress, and join the arms race blindly. That just accelerates the global problem.
Right. It has to lead the diplomatic charge as well.
India must leverage its growing technological power to actively lead in shaping global norms. It must champion consensus building to create new, binding international frameworks that replace that outdated 1967 treaty. The ultimate goal is to prevent a runaway, catastrophic arms race and ensure space remains a constructive, shared domain, all while firmly safeguarding its own borders and assets.
It's an incredibly delicate balancing act, preparing for war in space while actively writing the laws to prevent it. So let's distill this entire war room session.
Oh,
If you are stepping into a briefing tomorrow or, staring down a blank page on an exam, here is your revision capsule. Let's lock this analytical structure into your memory.
First, the core narrative you must drive home. The domain of space has definitively shifted from peaceful exploration to active weaponization. You must highlight that kinetic ASATs are giving way to deniable cyber threats and spoofing.
Second, the foundational problem is the regulatory void. We are operating under the obsolete 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which lacks any binding enforcement, making orbit a legal Wild West. Third, emphasize the civilian disguise. The traditional boundaries of warfare are completely blurred by private companies and dual-use satellites mixing civilian infrastructure with military intelligence.
Fourth, the institutional solution. India must establish a dedicated military integrated space command to centralize its response. And fifth, the policy solution. India urgently needs a national space doctrine to clearly define its red lines, its escalation thresholds, and its deterrence posture to the world.
And if you are constructing a 250-word answer or a formal memo, anchor it with these 5 analytical keywords. 1. Deterrence gap, the strategic vulnerability caused by a lack of matching counterspace forces. 2. Passive-aggressive warfare, referring to the strategic area denial use of space debris.
3. Civil-military-private synergy, the absolute necessity of integrating private tech startups into the defense architecture.
4. Escalation thresholds, defining the limits of conflict to prevent nuclear miscalculation. And 5. Dual-use espionage, the weaponization of civilian observation satellites.
If you face a direct question like, evaluate India's strategic vulnerabilities in outer space and discuss the measures required to build a robust deterrence posture, you now have the exact framework. Start your introduction with the shift from peaceful use to weaponization. In your body paragraphs, detail the deterrence gap, the economic strain, and the tech lag.
Then pivot to the solutions, the space command, the doctrine, and indigenous countertech like directed energy weapons and AI-driven SSA.
Exactly. And conclude by linking it all back to strategic autonomy and global leadership. It is a complete analytical loop.
It really connects national security directly to economic stability and technological governance. It is a fascinating, if slightly terrifying, new frontier. But before we wrap up this session, I want to leave you with one final scenario to mull over, building on everything we've just discussed about the chaos of this domain. We talked about space debris being used as area denial. We talked about the deeply blurred lines between private corporations and military actors.
Yeah.
Imagine this.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, a satellite owned by a private civilian tech corporation experiences a sudden, unexplained malfunction and explodes, creating a massive cloud of high-speed debris. Over the next 48 hours, that debris field sweeps through orbit and completely shreds the critical multi-billion-dollar military early warning satellite of a rival superpower.
Yeah.
In a domain with absolutely no binding treaties, no established space police, and no defined laws of armed conflict. What happens next?
Wow.
Is that an act of war by the nation where the company is headquartered? Is it just a tragic corporate liability case meant for civil court? Or is that exact scenario the spark that ignites the first truly global space-based conflict? How do you begin to answer that when the walls of the fortress don't matter anymore? Something to think about.